with introductions of me and Liz. I'm cohort 3, graduated in 2006 at BGI, and I'm co-founder of Dynamic Peace, which is a nonprofit organization that currently has a very small learning community that is supporting members in their efforts to promote peace in the world. And doing this presentation is something that my group has supported me in doing, because in the blog that I wrote that I had sent to Allie, and Allie asked me to do this, this group, Dynamic Peace, had given me feedback on that blog, which inspires this presentation. So that's who I am. Liz.
Sure. Yeah. Liz Kirkham-Zieg here. I'm cohort 6. I graduated in 2009, and I am currently by day product manager in healthcare reform. I moonlight as an astrologer, which you'll be hearing. I'll be wearing that hat tonight. And I also do work in culture and leadership change, which is a newer project that I'm working on with a past mentor of mine, and I'm very excited about that. So that's me, and I live in Vermont.
Yeah. And I'm here in Edmonds, Washington.
Oh, and one more thing. Lisa was my LPD instructor, as I'm sure many of you on the call. She was yours as well, and I'm so excited to continue my connection with her and be a part of tonight. And yeah,
that's right. I was co-instructing with Mary Kay at that time.
Yep.
So for tonight's session, let me get to the objectives here. We have 3 objectives, and that is the first one is to look at some challenges that are happening now globally, and to look at it through the perspective of Western science and this alternative and complementary science of astrology, and learn why this time period is an opportunity to, especially from a leadership perspective, to expand your ability to navigate ambiguity and uncertainty. And then to share practices, not just Liz and I, but others, to share practices that help you to do that. So that's our objective. And I'll start with talking about some of the things that are going on right now that are really getting our attention from a Western science perspective. So starting with the biggest one, which is COVID-19, and I'll talk about it from a timeline perspective. So in January and February, this is when COVID starts to really get our attention. At this point, this is where it starts to spread beyond China, into the US, to parts of Europe. So it's starting to become a concern throughout the rest of the world. Comparison to the Ebola virus. Ebola is a very serious virus, but it's more regionalized, and COVID's not proving to be that. And also the infection rate of COVID is potentially more infectious than SARS and MERS, which are coronaviruses that are in the class of what we call the zoonotic diseases, and these are diseases that transmit from animals to humans. And so SARS, MERS, COVID-19, they're zoonotic. So then in February, March, and April, COVID is declared a global pandemic by World Health Organization. And so we start to see at this point, cities, countries, they start to put into, shutdown. They start to close their borders. They enact lockdowns. And during that time, many people, not everyone, but like myself, I thought, okay, this is going to just be for a while. This period of uncertainty and ambiguity is just going to be for a relatively short time period, and we're going to get back to normal at some point. And definitely people in the know maybe didn't think that way, but there was a lot of people who thought that way. Then there were 2 studies that were published at the end of April that showed that the idea of COVID-19 being that recovery was going to be V-shaped, where infections rise, something is done, infections go down, and we're done, most likely is not going to happen. They showed high probability that what we're going to see is a W-shaped recovery, which is what we see happening right now, where infection rates rise, some lockdown measures are enacted, infections go down, some lockdown measures are relaxed, infections go up and down, up and down, up and down. And so May, June, July, what we're seeing is in the US, we're seeing a resurgence of cases as lockdown measures are relaxed. And we're still in the first wave, and some of the states there's significant concerns about the positivity rate of COVID-19. And for countries like China and Vietnam, which reached the end of their first wave, they're starting now to see the second wave of infection happen for COVID-19. So with this, what we're seeing is that this period of uncertainty and ambiguity, which people like me thought back in February, March, and April was going to be short, we're now seeing this thing is going to be prolonged. Much longer than we thought. And that report that came out at the end of April actually said, potentially up to 2 years, we're going to see this potentially up and down pattern. So that's kind of a really brief overview of what's happening with COVID-19, very simplistic perspective. But there's also other things that are happening simultaneously. And I'll just name a couple things that are really getting our attention right now. And one of them is the racial inequality. And that, with the killing of George Floyd on May 26th, prompting a lot of protests here in the US and also prompting protests throughout the world, we're seeing that there's a social, a tipping point that's happening. This is institutional racism. We're not wanting to put it back under the blanket. We need to address it. It's really up in our face. So that is up, not just in the US, but around the world. Also, another big simultaneous challenge that is up, that's been happening for quite some time, similar to institutional racism, is climate change, the effects of climate change. And so there was a recent report that came out about the South Pole, where they've had record high temperatures and for these past 3 decades. And part of it due to natural temperature changes in the area, but also most likely human activity, and which is resulting in the warming of the waters in that area, which affects the overall global ecosystem, And so these things are up, these things are happening at the same time as COVID-19. And in fact, what we're finding with COVID-19 is that it's highlighting some of the inequality issues that have been with us. And so, for example, what we're finding is that more people of color are experiencing higher rates of mortality, joblessness, hospitalizations, especially Blacks, Indigenous, and Hispanic and Latino groups. We're seeing COVID-19 highlight some of the socioeconomic inequalities. An example of that is we're recognizing that school is not equitable for all children. Some children don't have reliable, with distance learning, some children don't have reliable internet access. Some of these children don't have places in their home or places in general that are comfortable and conducive to studying. Some of these children don't have access to someone who could help them get access to the learning materials. So that's up. That's being highlighted with COVID, and there's a lot of discussion about what's going to go on in the fall. So also countries like South Africa, the parts that are impoverished, are being made more impoverished during this time of COVID-19. So in the first quarter of 2020, there was 30% unemployment rate in South Africa, and it's expected to go even higher with permanent layoff, which has really long-term implications. And so what we find with that is that people are moving from the city where their jobs were to rural villages to live with their families, which is putting pressure on the families. And so a survey that was done recently showed that of the 47% of the households that they interviewed, that these households were saying, we don't think we can afford to buy food for our families in the month of April. And that is 2 times higher than that of households in a similar survey that was done in 2017. So COVID-19 is kind of highlighting these issues that are up for us. Now, we also have COVID-19 is highlighting some environmental problems that have been with us. So it's highlighting the impact of human activity on climate change. We saw a temporary reduction in CO2 levels with less cars on the road, with less airplanes up in the air, proving that human activity does contribute to greenhouse gases. It's highlighting this broken relationship that humans have with nature. And so there's this quote from Inger Anderson. She's executive director of United Nations Environment Program. She says, regarding this relationship with nature, the science is clear that if we keep exploiting wildlife and destroying our ecosystems, then we can expect to see a steady stream of these diseases jumping from animals to humans in the years ahead. So we can expect to see more zoonotic diseases. So, I don't mean to be a downer on this, but this is what's happening in the world. This is what's getting our attention. And these are some interesting connections between COVID and COVID-19 and existing issues that have been with us. So how might this be different than other times where major challenges have converged? So this is a quote by World Economic Forum. Some people from the World Economic Forum in a book that just came out this month called COVID-19, The Great Reset. They're seeing this coronavirus pandemic as triggering this worldwide crisis, and this situation that we're in right now has no parallel in modern history. So that's pretty significant. And the injustices and the climate change issues are just a couple of things, are a couple of the deficiencies that we have in this overall global system. And this book talks about other deficiencies that are being highlighted by COVID-19. So we have, in this moment, we have this major challenge, all these major challenges that are kind of converging, and we're seeing the intertwining of them, with COVID-19 highlighting them. It's a pretty complex situation. But one of the things that it's doing, at least from my perspective, it's showing us how interdependent we are, how interdependent we are with nature, how interdependent we are with each other. And which should not be a surprise to us here at this school because of our education in systems thinking. But for others, hopefully this is what they see. Those not familiar with systems thinking, hopefully this is what they see. We are interdependent beings. We are interdependent with everything around us. And this is also known by a lot of spiritual paths. So systems thinking, spiritual paths have been pointing to this fact. So, Western science is, and when I talk about Western science, I'm talking medical, scientific, social, economic, political, etc. We have quite an interesting problem happening right now. And this period of uncertainty and ambiguity, which is happening on all scales, especially at the personal level, is a prolonged time period of which we don't know how long. Now, but there's this opportunity. What's really cool is that simultaneously, there is this really unique astrological phenomenon that's happening as we are in this convergence of these major events. And understanding this astrological, this unique phenomenon is an opportunity. It presents an opportunity for us from a personal development level, and also all the way up to a global level. So I'm going to have Liz explain that in a moment here. And before we do that, are there any questions? Maybe I should check the chat box. Liz, do you see anything in the chat box that we could answer that would help clarify?
I don't see anything yet, or I didn't see any questions or comments, no.
Okay. If you guys think of some, just go ahead and put it in the chat box. I'll monitor at this point. And Liz will talk about the astrological aspect, this phenomena that's happening simultaneously with the global events that are up.
Yes.
So, and I will control the slides for you, Liz.
Okay, perfect. So kind of echoing on what Lisa said, I think that part of my understanding and practice of an astrologer really is based on this sense of how interdependent and how interrelated we are, not only to each other, but also to our planet and to the other planets as well. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the type of astrology that I do. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not be. Feel free to chime in and ask questions, because astrology is something that I feel like people either understand a lot about or have no idea whatsoever. So that's totally cool wherever you're at. So this interconnection, and that's part of why we wanted to bring in the astrology for this particular session, of just how it's the interconnection and interrelatedness of these current issues is at a scale that we potentially haven't seen thus far with our human experience here on Earth, and why that ties into astrology. So archetypal astrology is really connected to depth psychology. And if you're familiar at all with like Jungian psychology and the use of archetypes in that system, there's a lot of overlap. Jung himself, interestingly enough, started working with astrological charts with his clients towards the end of his career, and was a big proponent of using astrology for personal growth and for working with these different archetypes. So it's really based on the idea that everything has a consciousness, including the planets in our solar system, and that those planets correspond to different archetypes. And for those of you that don't know, or maybe aren't familiar with the word archetype, it's really this universal symbol that has a lot of power that's kind of derived from, or has been derived from, our human experience kind of thus far. You kind of see archetypes come up in mythological stories, in different, even songs, in movies, you see different archetypes come up, and they're these powerful symbols that exist in our psyches, but also in our world. So another thing I want to mention, and I'm going to dive into the specific archetypes that are at play right now that I think are potentially a helpful perspective in understanding what's currently going on for us personally and collectively. But before I do that, I just want to mention briefly, but importantly, kind of how my sense of how this sort of all works, because I think some folks think, oh, the planets are sort of doing this to us, and what does that mean? And just want to clarify that it's not a deterministic or mechanistic system. So the planets are moving and interacting with each other in these different geometric relationships called aspects. And that's basically showing a pattern in the sky. And that pattern in the sky and some of the archetypes associated with those patterns in the sky, like we're experiencing how much the planets are doing, they're happening. We're experiencing them personally. We're also seeing them reflected in this larger universe that we're all a part of, that's a living and breathing, meaningful universe. So I mention that because the more that we're aware of these cycles, it gives us, in my mind, a deeper feeling of empowerment, so that we're not just sort of like, oh no, this is happening to me. We are more of an active participant in what's going on. So the idea is that by understanding these archetypes, by understanding this astrological system, it gives us a greater degree of strength and empowerment for our personal development, but also for our world development, I guess you could say. So does that make sense? I've covered a sort of a thumbnail sketch of a lot of things, but if you have specific questions, I'm happy to
I actually would
answer.
like to say something that,
Yeah.
I call astrology science. And I don't know if everyone would do that, but I see it as a science that is older than Western sciences, that is been studied seriously by a lot of learned people. So that's why I called it a science. I think it's that important.
Yeah, it is older than the scientific method. That does, I mean, there are folks that are rankled by that, but it's also practiced in a lot of different ways. So what we're talking about tonight is not sort of the sun sign astrology, which tends to be, I think, can be useful, but it's much more kind of superficial and generic in nature. So this is a bit of a shift from that. But thank you, Lisa. And really, every culture since the dawn of times had some kind of system of looking at the stars and making meaning from them, and actually making specific timing calls or judgments, whether it's crops, whether it's navigation. That it's been powerful in our psyches for a long time. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the first archetype I want to talk about. And just to clarify that connection between the plants and archetypes, each of the plants I'm talking about kind of correspond to a specific archetype. And I'll talk a little bit about what are some of the key questions that are up for us with that archetype. What are some of the current examples at a societal level of that archetype? And then some personal examples, which you may resonate to yourself. And one other thing I want to mention is that your personal experience of these archetypes is going to be different, because there are transits that we all experience collectively, and then there's also your personal experience of that transit, and everybody is different in how much this particular archetype will show up for you right now. Throughout your life, you will have some Saturn time at some point, whether or not a transit. Yeah,
transit. What's
transit
transit?
or event.
Someone's asking what transit is.
Oh, transit is. So a transit is a great question. A transit is when these planets, they're always moving in the sky, just as the Earth is always moving. A transit is when they come in an angular contact with each other. So that could be a square, a 90-degree angle. That could be an opposition, which is a 180-degree angle. Or that could be a conjunction, which is when they're right next to each other. And those configurations, not only are they making aspects to each other in the sky, but they are making aspects to whatever your natal chart is, which is basically a map of the planets the moment that you were born. So if you were born with Saturn in Aquarius, which is anybody that's about in your late 20s right now, give or take, you're going to be going through your Saturn return. And that is a transit to your natal chart. That is a personal transit to you, but also sort of a generational transit to people that are around that age. Hopefully that's helpful. Does that help clarify? Just tell me if not, and I'll move on to Saturn. I think it'll start to make sense. Okay.
I think so.
So Saturn, the archetype of Saturn is this Chronos, grandfather time energy. It is an energy that is all about structure and work. When I think about Saturn in this way, I think about sort of the rule of law and all these societal agreements we've made with each other to stop at stop signs, to agree not to steal, things like that. Saturn focuses our energy, distills our energy. And often during Saturn times, we're confronting regulations. We're becoming more aware of our boundaries. It's a time where we tend to feel risk and danger more acutely and seek security during those times. I think the sense of the letter of the law and the rule book is a good way to think about Saturn energy. So key questions that we ask during Saturn times is really, does this rule book work for us now? Do we need to change up the structure? And also, like, who is my true authority right now? So how we see this in examples in society, I think the Black Lives Matter protests are a very good example in this sense, this idea of defunding the police. Like, we're really reevaluating what we see as safety and protection in our culture, and how does that work, and what are some of the challenges to that. But I think you could also say, what are some of the things that really aren't working, or aren't working for everybody. And it becomes clearer and clearer to everybody that these different systems that have been set up to so-called sort of protect people's freedoms are not doing that equally across the board. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement particularly emphasizes that, but also the inequalities with COVID, as Lisa mentioned, those are also kind of in our face right now collectively. And so it's sort of asking us, like, what have we learned from our experience? Are we going to choose differently next time? So personal examples, when people are going through Saturn, the Saturn archetype is up, is you'll often see a job change, job promotion. You'll be getting more responsibility at work. It's not uncommon to see marriages, divorces, graduations, sometimes people becoming a parent. It's the sense of life structure is changing, and oftentimes coming up, and they often come with a certain amount of increase of responsibility, and that felt sense of what you sort of stand for. All right, so I'm going to move on just for the sake of time. So we've got Pluto, which is the next archetype we're going to talk about. Even though Pluto has kind of been demoted as a planet, as astrologers, we've seen this archetype repeatedly come up and be very powerful in its execution. And it's something that I know I personally still pay a lot of attention to, and I think other astrologers do as well. So it carries with it this archetype of Kali, which you can see from this picture is a very powerful dynamic energy. It's death and rebirth. It's a shamanic initiation, which is really getting in touch with our core purpose. And part of what it does is it strips away everything that's not working. So it's a time where there's going to be a lot of change. I think that part of this we see currently with kind of this authoritarian populism, extremist dynamic, and the polarities just within our political arena are an example where we're being pushed to extremes in order to go through this initiation, in order to be transformed. It's also a time where collectively we grapple with our collective shadow. You know, the US has a pretty violent past, and I think that's partly what's sort of up for us, is how are we going to increase our awareness of that and heal from that, like by coming together versus breaking apart. So a key question with Pluto is, what needs to die, you know, to make way for that positive transformation? So examples that we've seen in society, I mentioned a couple with our political situation, but I also would say the transformation of climate change is a very powerful indication of Plutonian energy. Another aspect of this is abuses of power that kind of come to light in examples in society. I think you could also say, like, the Me Too movement and people grappling more with becoming more aware of the harm of sexual abuse and how rampant it is, and what that means for folks to heal from that as well. So personal examples of how this shows up in people's personal lives. Sometimes it's just a complete life rehaul, like relationship, job, move. Like, some people just go through the gauntlet and strip everything bare to arrive at their kind of new sense of being embodied at this go around. I definitely have seen that happen. You also see people who are kind of hit bottom with addiction and recovery and start themselves on that journey in a powerful way. Uncovering and healing uncovering and healing from trauma in all forms is very common with Pluto. And you also see deaths and births in families. I've seen that with Pluto events too. Those are really big marking points and changes
Hey,
for
Liz.
folks. Yeah,
Liz, just a second. Hey,
yeah,
seems like Stephen Cahill is not hearing quite as well. You're clear to me. Is anyone else
okay.
having problems with sound?
I am in Vermont, which is like a 2G state. So hopefully it's still coming through. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so that's Saturn and Pluto. We can go to the next slide here, Lisa, which is Uranus. And Uranus is the energy of Prometheus, who stole fire from the heavens in rebellion against the gods to give humankind greater freedom, which I think is a really interesting way to think about this archetype, because it's all about rapid change that brings about liberation. It's very future oriented. It's very much about innovation and what are we wanting to create by being more authentic, by kind of stripping away what's no longer working. So the key question here is what's being liberated, and also what actions are really authentic for me to take. I think a really great example in society around some of this energy is some of the youth leadership that you see in the climate change movement and also in the Black Lives Matter movement. You see some young activists that are really coming to the fore in very powerful ways and collective ways, and sharing their power, I guess, and seeing how the importance of kind of lifting up every voice. That's been really inspiring to me. I think another example just in society is the kind of the correcting of financial markets. So you often see strong Uranus signatures with like the 2008, 2009 Great Recession. There was a strong Uranus event around that time. You're also seeing it, I think, now, and we'll continue to see it with whatever resetting economically is going to continue to unfold. So it often brings about economic contraction, which is most commonly followed by technological innovation and change. It kind of catapults us out of stagnation. So the way to this, you may experience this personally in your personal life. I see a lot of folks go through like total career left turns. So they're, working in as a lawyer, and they're like, I need to become a garlic farmer. Like Uranus transits are notorious for people making abrupt changes like that. Also relationship changes. If your relationship is not supporting your individuation and individuality, it's often that folks will break up during this time. So it's about taking risks and making changes.
Hey, Liz, can you say
Yeah,
something about like these sets of planets are up, and like when has something like this happened in the past? This set of planets, this
great question.
configuration.
So they go through different cycles with each other, which I don't want to bore you too much at this point in the evening, but what I will say is that this particular configuration right now of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, all in the sign of Capricorn, has not happened for 500 years. And so this really is a planetary alignment that's unique to modern times. And it's unique to this period of unprecedented global experience of these interrelated issues, as Lisa outlined.
Yeah, and also this configuration has been known for quite some time by astrologers. And
Yeah,
there's an actual documentary coming out in the fall about this set of configurations.
yeah,
So it's a pretty serious thing.
I'm really excited for that, and I think they're basically kind of looking at how the period of rapid change during the 60s and the period of rapid change during now, basically for quite a few years, they kind of have pretty prolonged time periods. And also, I think during the American Revolution, how these different time periods have some similar characteristics astrologically. It's going to be great. I can't wait for it to come out. So the reason why we talk about these archetypes, like, well, what does this mean, is that it's really important for us to own them so they don't own us. When we project them onto others, we tend to be in a disempowered place, and these are intense energies, as you've probably gathered. And the more that we can own them personally, and kind of just wrestle with them and have them be vehicles for change and healing in our lives, the better position we are to be more of an active participant in what's going on, and find our way in a way that feels empowering, in a way that feels like we're playing our part, I guess, in something, in action that feels authentic to us. So just very briefly, because I know we're running short on time, I just wanted to highlight a little bit of kind of the cycle of 2019, 2020, 2021 of some of the big.
We're doing good on time.
We're doing okay? Okay, good.
Liz, one quick thing. Somebody mentioned a documentary, and somebody asked what that was. I'll type it in.
Oh, yes.
It's called Changing of the Gods. Is that what they're asking?
Yeah, I can send a link to, let me get through this time frame stuff and I'll post a link to it in the chat too. Yeah. It's going to be great. Richard Tarnas is a great guy to Google if you guys are interested in learning more about this. He's done phenomenal in-depth research on these historical time periods and astrological correlation. He's a phenomenal scholar. Okay, so just briefly, 2019, we had Saturn conjunct Pluto. And so Saturn is father time, Chronos, Pluto is Kali. We had these two archetypes. Conjunct means right next to each other in the sky. So it's a powerful event. It's like, there's like, the pressure of it is like tectonic plates in the earth, like moving against each other. That's this feeling of this energy. And so it surfaced a lot of issues and our limitations, issues of climate change. I think it was the start of our response to COVID, or lack of response to COVID. Really this sense of how our relationship to Mother Nature needs to change, as Lisa mentioned. And then we also saw the Me Too movement take hold, as well as the Black Lives Matter take hold. So speaking truth to power, shout out to Libba on that one. Speaking truth to power became something that people were realizing the importance of doing that, and the importance of highlighting where these power structures are not serving the needs of the greater good. So we move into 2020, and we all know business as usual stops. We're really forced to review and experience the impacts of decades of human activity that have led us to this point. And they no longer serve us, and the weak links are being exposed and laid bare. And we're in the midst of that right now. So it's really, it's not necessarily a time for trying to power through and take action. It's a time for awareness and exposing yourself to what's going on, and letting that kind of inform and sort of foment in your consciousness of who you are and how these archetypes are working within you. So then we move to... So
it's surfacing these deficiencies in the overall global system.
Yeah, and possibly in your personal life too.
Yeah,
there may be aspects
global, where all the way down to the personal scale.
Yeah, because I think people are really reassessing of like, is this job really working for me? What does this next 2 years look like? Do I want to live in the city? Do I want to live in the country? Relationships to children, all of those things are under a lot of pressure right now. So then we move into 2021, and 2021, I love saying this as an astrologer, it's like breakdown to breakthrough. So right now we're in breakdown mode, and 2021 we have a strong Uranus signature, which really brings in that innovation and change. So I think that people talk about this COVID global pandemic period. There's a lot of folks predicting a renaissance in the arts. I think we'll see a lot of innovation and change in technology as a result of it. So we start to kind of get a bit more of a sense of what does the future even hold for us as we move more into 2021. And I think...
And these energies continue. I mean, it doesn't like
all
of a sudden.
Yes.
Yeah, just
these energies, I mean, if you think about the cycle, so it takes the Earth 365 days to go around the sun. Pluto takes 280 years. Saturn takes about 30 years. Uranus takes about 85 years, or 85 to 87 years, depending on where on a couple things. So these are long cycles, and they will continue to happen, but some of them won't happen necessarily in our lifetimes. So there is that unique aspect about what's going on now, but also the sense that we are part of a greater rhythm of the universe and our connection to that. And to me, it's really helpful to look at that because I feel like it helps me take my life less personally, to have that perspective. And that's really, you know, my hope and wish in sharing this with others is to help give that perspective, to allow yourself to kind of tap into some of these archetypes for the greater good.
So, you know, while life looks pretty interesting and challenging right now, depending on what choices we make as a race will determine, you know, what's going to happen in 2021 and beyond. So yes, we can have a renaissance of really wonderful things, but we can also make some choices that don't get us there, or that are going to get us there much slower. And so we have some choices to make. And so knowing all this combination of this unique astrological energies and these global events that are happening, okay, you know what? So what? You know what? Please move. Okay, what's the opportunity here? Like I said earlier, that, you know, we're in this prolonged period of uncertainty and ambiguity. It's with us, as much as I would like for things to get to some sort of new normal. So it's not for a while. And whether we like it or not, this prolonged period of uncertainty and ambiguity is presenting an opportunity for us as leaders to get better at navigating uncertainty and ambiguity. And tied into this opportunity is this quote by the Four Worlds International and United Indians of All Tribes Foundation. This was coming from a document that was created in 2008. This quote that I have here talks about the interdependency, where everything is connected to everything else. Therefore, any aspect of our healing and development is related to all others: personal, social, cultural, political, economic. And when we work on any one part, the whole circle is affected. Oops. So, so knowing this, you know, this interdependency, that, you know, what we do at a personal level has a way of rippling out into the world. So focusing on positive personal growth, personal development at this point, has a way of affecting the whole circle. So, and this opportunity to expand our ability to handle uncertainty and ambiguity is a good focus to focus your personal development on. And, you know, well, so what does that mean? How do you do that? Like, I have all these buttons to push and I keep pushing the wrong ones. So you do this from a personal development is to really look at your personal practices. You know, what personal practices do you do that help you to deal with uncertainty and ambiguity? And personal practices require your will, require your battery to focus and to do on a regular basis. But during this time frame, what's really cool is not only do you have your own battery to get deeper into your personal practices, but there is cosmic support. There's like this cosmic battery that you can tap into that is very unique, that will help you to make deeper and more impactful personal changes, which contribute to the whole. So, and you know, so how do you tap into this cosmic battery? And I think Liz may have something to say about this. My sense of it is that the way to look at this is to really examine one's personal practices that they have for personal development, and to look at them and try to understand what is the deeper intent of me doing these personal practices in the first place. And that has a way of really kind of connecting to something larger beyond oneself and being and opening oneself up to this kind of cosmic battery that then deepens one into the practice. So for example, I have this girlfriend group, and prior to COVID-19, we would get together periodically on our birthdays to celebrate. And so when the shutdown happened, we started meeting on Zoom on a weekly basis. And initially it was just to kind of catch up, to feel, just to connect, but I started really looking at it as, what is this about? What is this weekly meeting of these girlfriends about? And I saw it as a personal practice because it was something I put a lot of intent in, something that's very sacred to me, something that's done on a very regular basis. And I look at this regular get together that happens on Wednesday night around this time, and it's happening right now. And I think, I am learning to listen at a deeper level. I am learning, the intent is to learn how to listen better. The intent is to get in touch and open my heart and respond to my girlfriends, some of them are going through very hard times, to respond from that heart place, in addition to my mind, but a lot from the heart place. And to feel the power of our friendship in a way that I have never felt before. And in doing that, the connection is very powerful in my life. And several of the girlfriends have mentioned how powerful this regular get together is. And so that I feel, by looking at that practice of getting together, understanding what is the deeper cut of why I'm doing this, I feel like has opened up to something else supporting us other than just our wills, our individual wills. It's like some other bigger battery has done something. And I feel like it's contributory to the whole system. And so, this is what we can do to contribute to humanity, to move into this time of Uranus, Prometheus, to help create the Renaissance, help create these positive, innovative technologies out there by feeding out this kind of positive vibe energy of our own personal development. So are there any questions before what I'd like to do is just to get into a discussion of practices that people do, and to maybe have people look at, why are they doing it in the first place? What's the deeper cut? And then also for people to hear what types of practices people are doing to kind of help them deal with the stress of uncertainty and ambiguity. And maybe you'll hear about a practice that you want to take on for yourself during this time frame. So that's what I'd like to do right now. In the meantime, are there any questions before we turn off the recording? Looking at the chat box. Bye, Drew.
Bye, Drew.
Okay. So, personal practices. I think we need to stop recording at this point. You're welcome, Gifford. Allie, if you can do that.